Welcome everyone for taking your Saturday afternoon to be here for this talk and to take a little bit of a deep dive into what the canners are experiencing and perhaps what we can learn and do to make a population that is so vital to our city, how to make their lives better. And in return, make our lives better. So let me just get started. My name is Siyan. I'm the painter, and I'm so happy to be able to shed some light on the people who are so vital, whose spirit is so admirable in my view, who are doing such important work to survive and to live. That is so a part of our city. A little bit about myself. I was born in China, immigrated here when I was 11. I've been living in New York City ever since. I'm a painter, and I'm also working as a workers' rights lawyer. So my work often involves people who work, make a living. I think their stories are important. I realize that just being a workers' rights lawyer has this limit, and I'm expanding into the arts to share what I see and also to hopefully have a bigger conversation. And let me introduce to you the panelists that we have today, who are really wonderful people I met in the process of painting. So immediately to my left is Gene Rice. He's a founding board member of Picture the Homeless and the founder of Picture Homeless Canners campaign. While at Picture the Homeless, he became a poverty scholar at Union Theological Seminary's Poverty Initiative, which was a forerunner of the National Poor People's Campaign. Formerly homeless and an ecological engineer, which Gene will explain. And public solicitor, he spent decades working and as well as having stepped on the streets of New York City. He also worked at We Can, which is the predecessor of Sure We Can, which is a non-for-profit recycling center. We Can was on Manhattan's Far West Side. Sure We Can is in Brooklyn. There's a little bit more about him in the bio. And then to Gene's left is Lynn Lewis. She has worked at the intersection of community organizing in oral history, and she actually worked at Picture the Homeless for 17 years as the executive director, as well as the civil rights organizers for 8 years. In that role, she worked with homeless folks. Many of them collected cans and bottles for income and were members of the Civil Rights Committee because they were harassed by the police in public space while canning. From that work, the Canners campaign emerged in 2004, working to preserve and expand the bottle bill. And Gene will explain a little bit about what that bottle bill was. In 2017, Lynn moved on to collecting oral histories of Picture the Homeless and the longtime leaders, former staff, and allies, including folks who collect cans. And further to Lynn's left is Ryan Castalia. He's an artist and an advocate that currently serves as the executive director of Sure We Can, New York's only nonprofit directly serving canners, the folks who collect bottles and cans to earn income. Using approaches learned through the nonprofit world, activism, experimental theater practice, and from the community of canners he serves, Ryan seeks to create conditions for a more compassionate and sustainable world to emerge. And in that effort, Ryan will talk a little bit about the current legislations that's in New York State in the works. This exhibition is all about getting to know 3 canners more deeply. So that said, today let's have a heart-to-heart talk about canning and the people who collect cans, and the people who are working at the forefront of advocating for the rights of people who collect cans to make an income. So I think in the minds of so many of us, I'm moderating, so I'll just be asking some general questions after, a bigger discussion here. We'll open it up for a broader discussion, and I think that'll be very interesting. So the big questions in my mind, I think, maybe who are they? Who are the people who collect cans? Why do they collect cans? And how do they do it? Right? Is it safe? Are they making a good living? To answer some of those questions, we have Jean Rice here, Lynn, and Ryan. So let me start by asking Ryan. So Ryan, from your time as the executive director of Sherry Can you tell us who the canners are? Do they, why do they collect cans? Do they have other jobs? Are they single, with a family? Are they primarily male, female? Are they young? Are they old?
Well, sure, thanks. And thanks for including me on this panel. And I just want to share briefly that this is actually a really interesting learning and sort of full circle experience to me. I'm meeting folks here who predate me in the history of Sure We Can, and of course the fight for recognition and dignity for canners here in New York City. So it's a real honor for me to be a part of this panel. Thank you all. As far as who the canners are, I have a sort of line that I use. I get this question reasonably often, which is that it's really hard to say. I mean, canners come from all walks of life, backgrounds, lifestyles. It's hard to pigeonhole them in terms of one demographic or one way of working or one style of life. I think what unites them is almost every canner experiences some degree, greater or lesser, in many cases greater, to traditional some degree of barrier to traditional employment. So they're put through they have some set of circumstances that make it hard for them to access the opportunities that might be conventionally expected in our society. And this kind of goes deeper than just the work of canning itself to talk about the sort of role of informal work in general in our society and the nature of low barrier work. And this is something that I talk about, but the bottle bill itself, the system that puts the deposit on containers that canners use to earn their income, is actually an incredibly empowering mechanism for folks with these types of barriers to participate, offer their labor to their communities, and not just earn a livelihood for themselves, I mean, to the degree that they can. Obviously, we'll talk further about the challenges associated with this work and the system itself. But they can not only earn, but they can offer an incredible and essential service to their communities at the same time. So canners as a group experience barriers, I would say, to traditional employment, and yet the bottle bill and the system itself offers an opportunity to kind of sidestep those barriers and still participate in an extremely meaningful way in our culture.
So Gina, I have a question for you. You were formerly homeless, and you used to collect cans and bottles for income. Tell us a little bit about how you began canning, and tell us about the term you prefer, ecological engineer, and what does that mean to you?
I'm going to invert your question and start with the bottom, because I want to frame it. Often, and even here today, we refer to people that retrieve recyclable containers as canners. I was privileged to enlarge my vision of what retrieving recyclable containers means globally to every Homo sapien that inhabits the planet Earth. I read a report a long time ago called Limits to Growth that was written by a group called the Club of Rome. And their findings was that if we continue to develop our technology, and as we do that, we our technology depends on the use of fossil fuels, and that in extracting these fossil fuels to enhance our technology, we contaminate the planet Earth. That in a short period of time, planet Earth will become inhabitable. So then, with the trips that my organization provided for me, I got the opportunity to see strip mining in Central and South America. I got the opportunity to see mountaintop removal in Appalachia. And all of a sudden the dots started to connect. That in Appalachia, when you do mountaintop removal, you release all these contaminants into the air. And people in Appalachia suffer disproportionately from respiratory illness. And then, Central and South America, strip mining by Alcoa, Reynolds, and Canadian companies in pursuit of bauxite that's essential to the production of aluminum also has a devastating impact on that ecology. So I started to see people that were retrieving these recyclable containers and putting them back into the system without further replenishing our planet. I saw that as ecological engineering. So I guess it took a long way around, but I wanted you to understand that when I use the term ecological engineers, instead of canning, I'm not led by my ego or my vanity, that I have a concrete basis for calling the people that retrieve recyclable containers ecological engineers. And that's why I took up your time to explain that to you. And from China to Brazil to Jamaica, it's not a local issue, it's a global issue. And I want to thank all of you that came today, but I'm going to charge you with doing some critical thinking and passing your thoughts on to other people. Because the adverse parties to our struggle are resourceful. There's a reason why ExxonMobil spends more money on getting more land to exploit than to contribute to the redevelopment of renewable energy. And we have a responsibility because ExxonMobil gets tax breaks that should be earmarked. The tax breaks should be predicated on how much they contribute to the redevelopment of renewable energy. And that's our money that they're giving away, and we should make conditions on the giveaways. So I guess that's my position on why I do what I do, and I try to make it short and concise, but that's how I got involved, and I thank God that Picture of the Homeless gave me the opportunity to experience hands-on how our earth is being raped at on a global level, and the devastation that's being caused. It won't just affect people in New York or in the United States, but it's going to be a global catastrophe if we don't band together and do something to change the manner in which the status quo is addressing this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We definitely appreciate this global view, and that's what made you the leader, that started this, one of the leaders that started the Canners campaign. For many of us, we're not even familiar with like the life of a canner. Like, what does it take to be a canner? The logistics. If you could share some of that so that more of us understand, is it easy to be a canner? Is it difficult to be a canner? Is it, what are some of the everyday challenges? How do you even start in the day canning?
First of all, the life of a canner who are disproportionately homeless contradicts the stereotype that the media puts out about homeless individuals. Number one, to be a successful canner, you have to be, time management is essential because you're competing against other people that pick up cans. And you're also competing against sanitation. Because if you're not on time, those recycled containers will go in the back of the sanitation truck and crushed up to be later deposited in a landfill somewhere that we're paying for. And monetarily and health-wise, because when the landfill erodes, those emissions go back into the atmosphere. So, time. Then you have to coordinate the time from the pickup to when you redeem. And if you are homeless and you got 5 bags of recyclable containers and you got that at 2 a.m. in the morning, after the restaurant's closed, after the sporting event is over, after the concert is over, then the problem becomes, what are you going to do with those recyclable containers until the supermarket opens or until the redemption center opens? So now, time coordination, storage. So what I used to do, I had a mail cart. I would put my recyclable containers at the bottom of the mail cart. I would insulate it with layers of cardboard, and then I would lay in the mail cart and cover myself with a blanket until the supermarket opened up. Sometimes I was successful, but as Lynn Lewis knows, all too often, the police under Bloomberg and Giuliani would come and say, you're loitering, I'm giving you a ticket, I'm running you through the system, I'm confiscating this stuff. And so those are some of the impediments that canners endure. I'm glad to say that since Giuliani and Bloomberg are history, the impediments have diminished, but they still exist.
Bless you.
Take this weekend, when it's marathon weekend, and tourists from all over the world come to New York City. And in the midst of the perceived threat to terror of threat, homeless people will be displaced for no good reason at all. They'll be deprived of the right to be in public space. So, for the people that collect recycled containers, and now, because recently we've got water bottles included, and because all these runners consume a whole lot of water, there'll be a lot of redeemers, disproportionately homeless, who will have bags of water bottles Sunday, Saturday night, Sunday into Monday morning. They will have no place to redeem those products. And I hope that the New York Police Department and the Sanitation Department doesn't deprive them of their labor and their property until they get the opportunity to redeem those recycled containers that would otherwise go into a landfill that taxpayers would have to pay for, and that would further, due to erosion, contaminate our atmosphere.
Thank you. Lynn, you've been at, you were at the Picture the Homeless for 17 years. What were some of the campaigns that you oversaw during your years as the executive director? And Canada's campaign was one of them. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Canada's campaign?
Mm-hmm. So back in 2001, you know, when I first met Jean, I actually heard Jean first because we used to meet in the basement of Judson Memorial Church, and I heard this I didn't know it was a bag of cans, but I heard this like jingle. But I would preface that by saying I love your work, Siyan, so much because it shows folks who are canning as workers, and it provides a window into seeing folks in a way perhaps that people might not be seeing them. And what I learned from Jean and Jean's cousin Prince, we met Prince first at Picture the Homeless, was the abuse that canners had to take. And we heard this from many canners. So one of the first things I learned from Jean was how when he went to redeem his cans at a supermarket, the supermarket manager told him he had to leave the store because he smelled and he couldn't be in his store. And Jean called me in the Judson office, and you know, it just was just one more of daily things that you would hear from people about how they were being abused and stigmatized and criminalized. Actually, in this case, not only for working, but for like contributing to the environment, right? So I called the guy, and the guy said to me, well, they have diseases, and I have children, and I can't go home bringing diseases. And so totally was treating Jean not as a human being, but as someone who was gonna basically like destroy his family, right? And Jean was exercising his rights under the law to cash in to get $12 a day, which is 240 bottles or cans. So you imagine working all night, and then you have to be like, okay, on this corner, this store is gonna let me cash in 240, and then I have to walk 10 blocks into this other place. So this is like the daily grind of it. And you know, it was outrageous. There was just no other way to put it. And then we met, I was the civil rights organizer then, and this was coming up in our civil rights meeting, one, because it was the only campaign, it was like our first campaign, and a lot of the original members of Picture the Homeless were canners. and even our co-director, Anthony Williams, also had been a canner. So this was very much a part of our like founding ethos, right? We met Eugene. Eugene's a founder of Sure We Can, and Eugene was always working. And so he didn't have time to come to any of these meetings, right? He was always working, and like a lot of the organizing and Picture the Homeless folks that were there would take information out and bring information in. Not everybody was coming to meetings all the time. And so Eugene came after he was assaulted by the police because he was seeking refuge under scaffolding because it was raining. So again, this is work that people are doing outside, right? So you're outside, all kinds of weather, waiting for supermarkets to open. This is before the reverse vending machines. You know, those were the result actually of canners organizing. That some supermarkets have those outside their stores and you all see them. But they didn't always exist. So canners would have to wait until someone from the supermarket felt like coming outside and giving you 200, you know, counting 240 and complaining that they didn't have the space to keep all these bottles. Well, that's their problem, is the law, right? So if there's a law, we have to figure out how to live with it. At that time in Manhattan, there was also a lot of beverage warehouses. So you could take a big payload, a big shopping cart, a big mail cart to one place. Like, thankfully, you can do that at Sure We Can. But that's like the only place in the city, unless it's like a for-profit beverage warehouse, and there aren't a lot of those anymore. And so as they started closing down on the west side of Midtown Manhattan because of gentrification, you know, people buying fancy condos or whatever, they don't want to see that, right? You know, people that have, that's why I love this painting, people that have often don't want to see or just don't even see people that are not, maybe they're an inconvenience to them as opposed to somebody to look upon with respect. And so police violence, the actual hard labor of canning, and so for us it was, you know, to dignify their experience as workers, we formed a separate canning committee.
So Lynn, just so that we could frame this, what period of time are we talking about that canners were experiencing this? And then if you could share a little bit of like what actual campaign changed it, including water bottles being redeemable.
Mm-hmm. So in 2000, and we became aware of this through Gene and his cousin Prince initially in 2001. And then it was in 2004 that we started a separate, it was canning and it was also panhandling and day labor were the three kind of economic justice related issues that kept coming up in our civil rights campaign. And so we said, okay, well, let's see if any of these three things have legs, if people really want to work on them. Because we were a very small organization. So it was, you know, there's a lot of issues. So what is it that people want to really dedicate their time to solve? And so it was really the Canners campaign, Eugene, Anna, who are really, I guess, the two principal founders of Sure We Can. There were other members. Charlie Heck was a canner, quite a few other members. We had crews from different parts of the city also, because people have like territory where they build relationships with supers and store managers and know certain areas. It's a pretty complex like ecosystem of laborers and workers. And so we're learning all these things. And then what was really the most, I think, made people the most indignant, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that the supermarkets were breaking the law.
Mm.
But homeless folks were being, and other canners, but homeless folks in general were being harassed for things that weren't against the law. So here you are, you're not breaking any law, but you get harassed but these store managers are breaking the law. They're not complying with the Better Bottle Bill. They're verbally abusing canners, yet nothing happens. So we reached out to Elliot Spitzer, was, as Jean used to say, the top cop, and miraculously he sent some lawyers to meet with us when we had moved to 116th Street, and this was in like 2004. And so they said, well, we need affidavits. And so they drafted what an affidavit, you know, because we had a lot of documentation, but they said, no, it has to be in this format. So we said, okay. And we had crews of canners who were part of the campaign who gathered affidavits. And then they came back and we met Reverend Cooper Camp at St. Mary's in Harlem, West Harlem. He had a crew of canners that were, they called themselves the Redeemers, which was very cute and fabulous. And so what canners were saying was, you know, we should get 10 cents, not 5 cents. Other states, the deposit is 10 cents. It's not a crazy thing to ask for. And so, and also had a vision that we can, a not-for-profit center could actually, there should be a whole bunch of them to make it convenient for canners and also other people. You know, there's a lot of people that would love to recycle their containers if it was convenient and easy, like who most people probably would. And so Sure We Can is kind of a, you know, a dream. It didn't happen from dreaming, it happened from work, but it is a perfect example of the kinds of things that folks in the Canners campaign really wanted to see. That it's something managed by canners. Canners knew this business inside and out. There's a wonderful video of Gene and his cousin Eugene Gatson talking about you have to sort the containers. You know, it's just not a simple thing. It's a lot of work, and canners are experts at that. And so these were the kinds of things we wanted to uplift the experience of canners and their knowledge. We wanted to expand opportunities for people to redeem recyclable containers. We wanted the workers, the canners, to get double what they were getting, which is nothing, 5 cents. You're working all night and you get, what, less than $100, you know, for a night of work, maybe much less, depends on the weather. And so all of those things, I think, were among our demands. And then the respect that the law says if you sell these kinds of beverages, then you are required to receive the recyclable containers and give up to 240 pieces back. That's just that's the law. And we had an action. There's a picture back here of Gene and Eugene, but we had an action targeting an associated supermarket because we did surveys of canners and learned that there were 3 high offending supermarket chains, and Associated was the worst. And Elliot Spitzer actually convened a meeting of their top executives of these supermarkets and threatened to fine them $500 a day. And so sometimes our friends in higher office, we don't even know who they might be. And for some reason, this really vibed with Elliot Spitzer, and so he really threw down. And so that taught us a lot of lessons also.
Ryan, I'll ask you a question about Sure We Can. I think people are probably very curious about that. Now, Sure We Can is the only non-profit recycling center for cans and bottles in New York City right now. Can you describe the physical size of Sure We Can? Who come through it each day? How many canners utilize the recycling center? Also tell us what you learned is the significance of an organization like Sure We Can.
Sure, thanks. I think Jean and Lynn have really done a great job of kind of contextualizing the gaps that existed, that it was Sure We Can's vision to fill, and the type of transformation that the organization was founded to effect. And I want to sort of take Jean's cue here and start maybe from the end of your question and talk about what's significant about the work itself. I mean, we've talked a bit about the work and how challenging it can be and all the logistics involved. I mean, it's a type of manual labor, and it has all the kind of qualities that other labor types also have. And yet it suffers from this terrible stigma. And on top, as waste work, as something unsightly, as something only for marginalized people. And sort of by that token, that's on top of the stigma that many of the individuals who do it face just because of who they are. People experiencing homelessness, people who maybe can't speak English, people who suffer from disabilities, either physical or mental, who are, again, back to what I started with, experience some degree of barrier to conventional inclusion in our society. And the mission of Sure We Can, at least at its root, is to shift the context around that work and around the way that the people who do it can manifest themselves in our culture by, first of all, making the work easier and more accessible, and hopefully more lucrative. We do that in a few different ways. We have a space. I mean, that's like a key point here, just to have space, especially in a place like New York City. That's very rare. Our organization spent 10 years under the threat of eviction, something that's very familiar to many canners, right? And just this past year, we finally succeeded in purchasing our site in East Williamsburg. So now there's a dedicated space for canners in Brooklyn. And for people who, for one reason or another, are not just occasionally, but regularly, habitually, potentially perpetually denied space, to have a space where they can not just do their work, but feel welcome, be recognized, supported, even to the point of knowing people's names or celebrating birthdays, celebrating holidays, creating a space where, normal life can happen, right? That, I think, is a huge part of the meaningful aspect of Sure We Can. And then some of the things that Jean pointed to, things like on-site storage for canners, where they can keep their materials in between visits. We're not at a point where we can do that 24/7, but maybe that's a dream where, like, even between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. is somewhere a canner could come to feel safe, right? Mm-hmm. And to feel like the value they've accumulated through their work is also safe. We're also trying to go beyond that by organizing. These successes that you're describing are incredible, and there's still work to be done, right? The deposit still hasn't gone up. It's been 40 years that canners have been earning the same income, 5 cents at a time, since 1983. And in any other sector of work, that type of stagnation would be practically inconceivable. So it's time for that to change, and we think, like has been mentioned, that canners are the ones with the experience, the authenticity, and the wherewithal, the power, the real kind of spirit and power to drive that change. So we're doing our best to create a context where canners can step into that role of being change makers and driving those types of transformations by, for example, this year we inaugurated our Alliance of Independent Recyclers, which is a new group of canners, not just within the boundaries of Sure We Can, the people who come to our redemption center to do their work, but hopefully that can eventually include canners from all across the city, and creating a context for them to discuss the issues that matter to them, elect their own leaders to represent them, hopefully eventually advocate to elected officials, city institutions for the types of transformations we're talking about. Again, using their own voices, not using our organization as like a mediator or middle entity, but rather putting those who have the know-how, the spirit, and the experience in the position to drive those kinds of transformations. So, and again, it can't happen without a place to meet.
That's right.
Without, and there's all sorts of qualitative, textural things that go into that too. The place has to feel welcoming, it has to feel stable, it has to feel safe, it has to feel uplifting, good, so little things that Anna started, like having a garden at our site. This is key. It's something that matters to Anna personally and has become a sort of a piece of the foundation of Sure We Can. there were artists living at the site in its early days, and now it's covered in murals and paintings, and all these things serve to create a context where we can sort of dream of these better worlds and do the work that it takes to hopefully make them a reality.
Okay, thank you. So how many canners approximately come through Sherry Can? Just like the...
Sure, we serve around 1,000 individuals a year, and that's going up. I mean, since the pandemic, obviously the migrant situation that's happening in New York City right now, there's more people than ever who are turning to this work out of interest or necessity, mostly necessity, and they need service. And I mean, because again, they're doing something vital and they need support.
So before I go back to the legislative efforts of Sure We Can and other groups that you're collaborating with, so Lynn, let me ask you, so now you are collecting stories of various people, and we have 2 stories from Jean Rice, that there's a QR code in the back, but there's a whole slew of oral histories that you're collecting and putting it together. What is the significance to you from switching from being the executive director of Picture the Homeless to now doing this work?
Well, you know what, Picture the Homeless, 17 years in ways isn't a long time, but it's also is a long time. And we had folks that came in after, you know, you have successive generations of staff and members, board members, political allies. And so I was at the first public meeting of Picture the Homeless and met the co-founders there. And Jean, you know, this was in January of 2000. Jean joined Picture the Homeless in 2001. But other people that came in later didn't necessarily even know we had a Canners campaign, or didn't know that we had a Potter's Field campaign, and changed city policies around not burials, people are still buried in mass graves, but being able to visit and give a dignified send-off. You know, the early work that we did and how and why we did it is easily lost in any organization. So the being welcoming, I love it that Ryan said that, because the oral history project for me isn't so much about, sometimes people say storytelling, but it's really, these are movement histories, right? And so we were listening for themes in each of the interviews, right? With oral history, you're listening for themes. With organizing, you're listening for issues. But it's kind of the same thing, what's important to people. And I do love that. I love listening. And so when you have a whole bunch of people saying the same things, that's a theme, you know, it's an issue. And we were, as an organizer, right, you're always wanting people to stay. You know, it's like you do outreach and people come and you're so happy, and then, but you want them to stay. And not just stay, but to get more involved, to take leadership. And so the question is always, what do we need to do to support people to not just stay, but to deepen their participation? And if we're talking about social change, to take risks, to do things that they maybe never saw themselves doing. Like Eugene that day, bringing his giant cart, Betsy's with his bag of cans in a protest, you know? And so it was very important to me as I was there over time to document these histories within the organization, thinking that we would use them as part of our homeless organizing academy, learning from people like Willie Baptist, who would share organizing stories as lessons. And we had learned a lot, but those kinds of lessons evaporate unless they're documented and also accessible in a way. They could be documented in a file cabinet somewhere, but do people know they're there? You know, how are we working with them and making them available, these lessons? And so I was very interested in that question, because I was sometimes, you know, it was sad that I would hear people talk about things and not knowing that we had actually done things either well or not well, but that we had our own lessons to learn from. And so for me, it's very important to document these organizing lessons, because our problems really aren't that complicated. And in terms of Picture the Homeless, people need a place to live. And it's not only homeless people, there are many, many more people who are barely hanging on to their housing. There are many, many more people who are becoming homeless. If everyone that was homeless today got a home, there would be lots more people who became homeless because we're not addressing those root causes. And I think that housing is one of the basic things as human beings that we need. And so we stigmatize folks who are homeless for not having a home, largely because of public policies that are in place. So we're not stigmatizing the policies, we're stigmatizing the people. And so I think our work there was very important, and it intersects with a lot of other issues. You know, it intersects with gender, it intersects with, you know, racial discrimination and systemic violence. It intersects with immigration. It intersects with low-wage work. And so I think that our work is important, was important, just like the work of other grassroots organizations is. But we're often so busy, we don't have time to do this. And so I decided I should do it. And I felt a responsibility, because I also feel like it was a blessing in many ways to have been part of kind of developing myself along with Jean and developing Picture the Homeless. And so I have actually a little postcard that has, we're part of a website now. That's kind of a miracle too. And so I think the oral history really vibes with organizing in the same way Ryan's talking about canners having expertise, that oral history is a way to give respect to folks' knowledge. So as you all heard, Jean always does a remarkable job of historicizing his life and his condition. But you can also hear that in conversations with people. You know, what happened at that time? What did it mean to you? You know, what impact did that have on your life? Folks all the time have the capacity to analyze the conditions of their lives and to identify solutions. Where organizing is different is there's a collective analysis, whereas oral history, you're kind of telling your take. And so that's why I've been calling the Oral History Project, there's 50 interviews, as like a memory quilt, because everybody's individual take on things is important, but you can't tell the history of an organization or a movement through one person's view. It takes many, because it took many to create it. So it's different, but I think it supports organizing when we can document the experience and the analysis of folks that were the ones that made these events happen.
And I think what I appreciate the most from the Oral History Project is that you're documenting the voices of the people who are in the struggle itself, including, you know, Jean and others. You know, often we read scholarly journals and newspapers, but we're not really hearing from the voices of the people who are experiencing and fighting back, organizing. So I think the Oral History Project is special to me for that reason. So I know we're running short in time, but I really want to ask Ryan, what is the current legislations right now in the works that really need to be passed, and who are working on those legislations? And then I will open it up to questions.
Absolutely. We are deeply involved in a process right now to try to expand the New York State bottle bill to raise the 5-cent deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents, to add new categories of containers. Like right now, for example, no juice, coffee, wine, liquor, And none of that is currently included in the bottle bill, so it all stays out on the streets or goes to the city's corporate partners. And we're also trying to raise the handling fee that allows redemption centers, not just like ours, but for-profit ones as well, to exist and create these access points for canners who work for a livelihood, who need to redeem these large volumes of containers to actually be able to do their work with some semblance of efficiency. Right now it's a dire situation for redemption centers. There are none at all in Manhattan in terms of actual sites that can take this amount of containers. And in other boroughs, they're also going out of business because they just can't afford to operate. So it's a critical moment for this legislation. So we're pushing really hard to make that happen. We're working especially with the New York Public Interest Research Group, or NYPIRG, who are leading the coalition to expand the bottle bill, along with many, many other environmental and social organizations. But I also just want to say that, at least in my perspective, I would call the bottle bill expansion sort of the bare minimum here in terms of institutional action around these systems, because we're talking about redress of decades of neglect, not really pushing the system into a more progressive place. And I'm really excited. Hopefully we're going to pass this bottle bill expansion and get to the point where we can talk about deeper, more potentially thorny or transformative issues, like, for example, a public right to waste here in New York City, where we could say that instead of calling the material that goes to the curb the property of DSNY or Sims, that's material that anybody could access and use to repurpose, repair, reuse, or what have you, right? A new way of thinking around who can control or take advantage of the value of that material. Because right now it is being controlled and taken advantage of, but excluded to these corporate entities who are using it to drive up their profits, not serve communities like ours. Things like a canner's bill of rights from the city, where we could have an actual articulation from the city that canners matter, their work is important, and they deserve certain specific protections and support. So really, I think the bottle bill is the starting point for these types of transformations. And I have a sort of fervent hope that we're nearing the point where these kinds of things can really be meaningfully considered in these large-scale institutional contexts. And I think really key to that is the type of organizing we're talking about, and getting the canners themselves in those rooms, at those tables, able to speak the truth of their experience, which, as we know and as we hear, right, is transformative in itself.
So if you could tell the audience who are going to be sharing this video, what is one thing ordinary, regular folk can do to make that happen?
Call your elected officials, call your state senator, your assembly person, tell them it is way past time to expand the bottle bill and it needs to happen. Call your council member and tell them that you want to see New York City stand up for this in a new way. You make your voice heard. It's absolutely the most important thing. And make sure you leave your bottles and cans out for your local canner.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to just allow everyone to ask the burning questions that you may have, or share your thoughts about what we have just talked about. Yes, your name, please?
Chris. So I paint as well, and I really just resonate with sort of seems like a simple desire to sort of just witness people that go unnoticed. I've painted folks in the homeless communities that I've known, but I'm wondering, like, within the sort of your style, there also seems to be some decisions that you're making around how the audience is interacting with the people that you're painting. And like one thing I'm noticing is that like you have this kind of like I feel like I'm in a position of like being inside of the image with the person. Or like thinking about who I would be in that painting. So I feel like I'm kind of included in the image, and then it becomes like a question of what is my thought process around who these people are or how I'm engaging with them. So what are your, like, within the painting, what are the specific choices that you're thinking about to help communicate what you're trying to say?
I think what you said is precisely what I am trying to do, is to for the viewer to have a conversation with the image that I put forth. I think that when I'm painting, I'm trying to get to know the person who I'm painting. And I think I get closer to the canners just because I'm painting like for hours. And I'm just trying to understand what are they experiencing. You know, like Choi Yi going through these, I don't know, like 20, 30, 40 bags of recycling very quickly before the recycling truck comes by. Like, what is she thinking? What is she going through? Is what I go through in my mind when I paint. And I get close to the issue because of that. And this is two cities where I paint her paint. And what he must be going through in his mind as he's walking the streets of Lower East Side, which is a huge, diverse community of really a lot of young people. It's a growing community, getting wealthier. People are paying a lot of rent money and displacing what used to be a more moderate income community. And I wonder what's going on in his mind. What is he thinking about where he's living? And this is what you see if you go to Canal and Essex, the intersection. I exaggerated a tiny bit, but this is pretty much what you see. And I think the conversation that you're having with my paintings makes me feel very good, because I think that you're walking the shoes I walk through as I'm painting. Thank you.
In the exhibition text, you mentioned that many of the canners that you painted had maybe previously been from the garment industry background, and I'm curious about that history and like how you, I guess, learned more about it or got to know some of those folks in the paintings.
Yeah, I only picked 3 canners because they are in different professions that I thought really represents the Chinese community. And I really wanted to share that and bring the community together. I just basically make friends with canners. I don't. I know a lot of people pick up cans after the garment industry went away. A lot of them, like 9/11, pretty much ended the garment industry. So many of the women in their 40s and 50s all of a sudden don't have a job, but they're not collecting Social Security. And it is, from being independent and economically strong and providing for the family to having no job, it caused a lot of mental issues in the community. I learned that because when my daughter was born in 2007, I put out an ad on Singdao, and it was only for 1 week, and I thought, I hope I get a nanny, somebody who would come and potentially take care of my kids. The moment that ad went into the paper, my phone went off the hook the next day. And I literally scheduled 10 appointments for that afternoon. And I had to basically stop picking up my calls. And as I was talking to these women who were being interviewed, they were 99% from the garment industry. And they were all, in my view, depressed. And have a lot of insecurities and doubt. And for the first time, I felt the weight of all the women who lost their jobs. So that kind of set in my mind for a very long time. And as I begin to paint the canners and I start talking to people, many of these women actually started picking up cans. They were used to earning piece rates. So picking up cans at 5 cents, they could count. And it became a sense of trying to get their economic power back in the home. It's not the same, but people were trying. And it's so indicative of the spirit in our community. So Choi is 97, 98 right now, and she's one of the women who doesn't have that work in the garment factory. And she's probably one of the earlier ones to actually not have to work because she's much older. So I think that for this exhibit, I definitely have to shed some light on the experiences of our community who were doing, women in particular, who were really economically viable for the family and then lost it. And yet, there were no legislations, there were nothing protecting them. That that's my next project. But thank you for asking that question.
I had a question about the raising the price of the can redeeming. Like, how does that happen? Does it raise in other states? And is it a common? Is it not common? Like, how?
Sure, that's a good question. Only 10 states in the United States right now have a system like this at all. And they all have kind of different rhythms or started in a different way. Like, for example, Michigan started its bottle bill in the 70s, and it started at 10 cents, which at the time was quite high. And there they have like an over 90% capture rate for the material because everybody just participates in it. They've been raised in the system. For us, with the 5-cent rate, which of course has become less and less of an incentive over time, now we have the situation where most of that material gets discarded, and so the canners come to fill that gap. And it varies from state to state. I think this issue is taking on a new tone as far as like public awareness and the sense of urgency around climate change and sustainability, waste crisis. It's all shifting, especially since for example, China stopped buying the recyclables that we were exporting. So I think what was 2019 or 2020, Oregon raised its deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents. So that's happened quite recently. There was an expansion in Connecticut quite recently. So it feels like the worm's kind of turning on some of these things, which gives us hope that we can see it here in New York as well. But it does have to happen on a state-by-state basis, and unfortunately it's rather piecemeal. There is conversation around a national bottle bill. With the state of our national legislature the way it is, it's hard to envision that happening in the near future, but it's being talked about, which of course is the starting point. So I think, in 10 years, maybe we might see something like that would really normalize this and create a whole new context for the people who do this kind of work.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to close up the chair so you could enjoy the arts, and feel free to, talk to any of us. There's a little water in the back if you're thirsty, and the bathroom's in the back. Thank you so much, everyone.